What if I told you that the people who fired me had no idea they just kicked out their own boss? That my sister helped destroy my career while I secretly owned the company she was trying to climb? And that the mentor who betrayed me was about to learn that 12 years of patience had been building toward this exact moment? This is the story of how I went from fired employee to CEO in 3 weeks, and why revenge is a dish best served with a 65% ownership stake. The fluorescent lights in the HR conference room felt like they were burning straight through my skull. I'd been called in unexpectedly, told it was urgent, but when I walked through that door, my stomach dropped. There they were, all sitting around that sterile white table like some kind of tribunal. Derek Saunders, my supposed mentor, wouldn't even look at me. Maya Ross, who I'd considered my closest friend at work, was staring down at her hands. And then there was Lily, my own sister, sitting there with this expression I couldn't quite read. The HR manager, this woman I'd barely spoken to in 3 years, cleared her throat and started reading from a folder. Alex Monroe, we're terminating your employment effective immediately due to ongoing behavioral issues and consistent resistance to organizational change. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Behavioral issues, resistance to change. I'd been nothing but dedicated to this company. I'd worked late nights, weekends, poured my heart into every project. And now they were sitting here talking about me like I was some kind of problem employee. I'm sorry, what behavioral issues? I managed to ask, my voice barely steady. Derek finally looked up, but his eyes were cold. Alex, you've been increasingly difficult to work with. Your colleagues have expressed concerns about your attitude, your inability to collaborate effectively. I looked at Maya, hoping for some kind of support, some sign that this was all a mistake. Instead, she just nodded slowly, like she was agreeing with everything being said. But it was Lily's face that really got to me. My little sister sitting there with the faintest smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Like she was enjoying this. Like she'd been waiting for this moment. Security was already at the door. They handed me a cardboard box and escorted me to my desk to pack up my things. 3 years of my life reduced to a box of personal items. My coffee mug, the small succulent plant I'd kept alive, somehow a few framed photos. As I walked through the office for the last time, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others just stared, probably wondering what I'd done to deserve this kind of public humiliation. The elevator ride down felt endless. My hands were shaking as I carried that pathetic box to my car. I sat there in the parking lot for a long time, just trying to process what had happened. That's when I pulled out my phone and made the call that would change everything. Jordan, it's Alex. Yeah, I know it's early, but we need to talk. They just fired me. I paused, looking back at the building where I'd just been escorted out like a criminal. I think it's time they learned who they're really dealing with. Because here's the thing, nobody in that room knew. Nobody in that entire company knew, except for one attorney who'd been keeping my secret for years. I owned 65% of Reynolds Tech, the company that just fired me. I'm their majority shareholder. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with my firing. It starts in Denver 27 years ago with a grandfather who taught me that sometimes the most powerful position is the one nobody sees coming. I grew up in one of those high achievement families, where success wasn't just expected, it was demanded. My parents were both professors, mom in psychology, dad in economics. Every dinner conversation was like an academic seminar, and every report card was analyzed like a quarterly earnings statement. I was the older child, and I wore that responsibility like armor. Debate team captain, science fair winner, honor roll every semester. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, achieve enough, maybe I could finally earn the kind of unconditional love that seemed to come so naturally to other families. Then there was Lily, 7 years younger, and everything I wasn't. Where I was serious and driven, she was creative and spontaneous. She wrote poetry, starred in school plays, had this natural charisma that made everyone gravitate toward her. My parents loved to compare us, usually not in my favor. Why can't you be more like Lily? She's so artistic, so free-spirited. Or my personal favorite, Alex is so focused on winning, but Lily understands that life is about more than achievements. It hurt, but I learned to bury that hurt deep. I told myself it didn't matter that I'd prove my worth through success. I'd show them all what I was capable of. The one person who really saw me, who understood what I was trying to do, was my grandfather, Ethan Monroe. Every Saturday, I'd go to his house and we'd play chess on this beautiful wooden board that had belonged to his father. Grandpa Ethan wasn't like my parents. He didn't lecture me about my grades or compare me to Lily. Instead, he taught me about strategy, about patience, about thinking 3 moves ahead while your opponent is still focused on their next turn. Alex, he'd say, moving his knight into position. The most dangerous player is the one nobody sees coming. They underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who watch and learn instead of making noise. He'd built his own company from nothing, a small tech firm that had grown into something substantial over the decades. But he was humble about it, never flashed his wealth or talked about business at family dinners. My parents saw him as just a sweet old man who spoiled his granddaughter with chess lessons and stories. They had no idea how much he was really teaching me. When I was in college studying business and marketing, Grandpa Ethan would quiz me about real scenarios from his company. He'd describe challenges they were facing, ask me how I'd handle them. I thought it was just theoretical educational exercises between a grandfather and his eager student. I was 22 when he called me to his study one evening. He looked older, somehow, more fragile than I'd ever seen him. "Alex, honey, I need to tell you something important. I've been sick for a while now, and the doctors, well, they're not optimistic." The world seemed to tilt. This man who'd been my anchor, my one source of unconditional support, was telling me he was dying. "I've made arrangements." He continued, pulling out a thick folder of legal documents. "My company, Reynolds Tech, is going to be yours. Not all of it, but a controlling interest. 65%. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "Grandpa, I'm not ready for something like that." He smiled, that same gentle smile he'd given me across thousands of chess games. "You've been ready since you were 8 years old and beat me for the first time. But Alex, I'm not giving this to you so you can walk in and take over. I'm giving it to you so you can learn." He explained the plan. The shares would be held in a trust managed by his attorney, Jordan Cho. I'd have control, but it would remain anonymous. I could work there, learn the business from the ground up, see how people really operated when they didn't know who was watching. See how they treat people when they don't know you're watching, he said, his voice serious now. That's when you learn who they really are. And more importantly, that's when you learn who you really are. 3 months later, Grandpa Ethan was gone. The funeral was small, quiet, just family and a few close friends. My parents inherited his house and some investments enough to make them comfortable, but nothing that seemed extraordinary. Nobody knew about Reynolds Tech. Nobody knew about the trust. Nobody knew that their disappointing older daughter had just become one of the youngest majority shareholders in the city. Jordan Cho, Grandpa's attorney, was a sharp woman in her 50s who took her role as trustee seriously. She explained how it would work. I'd apply to Reynolds like any other candidate using my real name but with no obvious connection to the Monroe family that might raise questions. "Your grandfather was very specific about this," Jordan told me during our first meeting. "He wanted you to earn your place there, to understand the business from every level. The ownership is your safety net, but it's not your identity." So, at 23, fresh out of college with my MBA, I applied for an entry-level position at Reynolds Tech. Marketing analyst starting salary, no special treatment. On paper, I was just another young professional trying to make her mark. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was interviewing for a job at a company I already owned. But as I sat in that waiting room, nervous about my first day, I thought about Grandpa Ethan's chess lessons. About patience, about strategy, about the power of being underestimated. I had no idea that 12 years later that strategy would save me from the worst betrayal of my life. And I definitely had no idea that the people I'd come to trust most in the world would be the ones holding the knife when they stabbed me in the back. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you about how I built a life at Reynolds Tech, how I found people I thought were family, and how I learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you most. My first day at Reynolds Tech, I made a decision that would define the next 12 years of my life. I was going to be invisible in the best possible way, smart enough to be valuable, humble enough to be overlooked, and observant enough to learn everything. I dressed down, conservative blazers, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I wanted to blend in, to be the kind of employee people noticed for their work, not their presence. The girl who got things done quietly while everyone else was busy making the noise. And it worked. I was assigned to the marketing analysis team, tucked away in a corner office that felt more like a library than a corporate workspace. Perfect. I could watch, learn, and understand how this company really operated from the inside. The work itself was fascinating. Consumer behavior analysis, market trend, forecasting, competitive intelligence. I'd always been good with numbers and patterns, but now I was applying those skills to real business challenges. Every spreadsheet told a story. Every data point revealed something about human nature. My supervisor was this older woman named Janet, who'd been with the company for 15 years. She was efficient, no nonsense, and completely uninterested in office politics. We got along perfectly. "You're different from the other young hires," she told me after my first month. "Most of them are trying to network their way up the ladder before they've even learned to climb. You actually care about doing the work right." If only she knew how right she was. But it was during new employee orientation that I met the person who would become my closest friend at Reynolds. Maya Ross was impossible to miss, even in a room full of eager new hires. She had this infectious laugh, this way of making everyone around her feel like they were part of something special. We were paired up for some team-building exercise, and within 5 minutes, I was laughing harder than I had in months. Maya had this gift for finding humor in everything, even the mind-numbing corporate training videos we had to sit through. "Oh my God," she whispered during a particularly dry presentation about compliance policies. "I think that guy just said synergistic optimization 15 times. Is that some kind of record?" I snorted, trying to keep my laughter quiet, and Maya grinned like she'd just won a prize. After orientation, we started having lunch together. Maya was in client relations, so she had all the best gossip about account drama and difficult customers. She'd act out conversations with impossible clients, doing different voices for each person until I was crying with laughter. But Maya wasn't just funny. She was genuinely kind, the type of person who remembered details about your life and checked in when you were having a rough week. When I mentioned that I was struggling to find a good apartment, she spent her entire weekend helping me apartment hunt. "This one's perfect," she said, standing in the middle of a sunny one-bedroom with hardwood floors and big windows. "Close to work, good neighborhood, and look at this kitchen. You could actually cook here." She was right. It was perfect, and having Maya help me pick it out somehow made it feel more like home. Maya and I became inseparable. Coffee runs, weekend, brunches, movie nights at my new apartment. She was the sister I'd always wanted, the friend who actually got my sense of humor and didn't make me feel like I had to perform or achieve to earn her affection. For the first time in my life, I had a friendship that felt effortless. But the relationship that really surprised me was with Derek Saunders. He was the marketing director, technically several levels above me, but he had this approachable way about him that made him seem less intimidating than the other executives. Derek was in his early 40s, divorced with 2 kids he clearly adored based on the photos covering his desk. He'd been with Reynolds for 8 years and had built the marketing department into something genuinely impressive. It started with him noticing my work. I'd submitted a competitive analysis report that apparently caught his attention, because the next thing I knew, he was asking me to present my findings to the senior team. "You've got a good eye for this?" he told me after the presentation went well. How long have you been doing market analysis? Officially about 6 months, I said, trying to stay humble. But I've always been interested in consumer behavior, understanding what makes people make the decisions they make. Derek nodded thoughtfully. Would you be interested in taking on some additional projects? Nothing that would interfere with your current responsibilities, but some higher level strategic work. I said yes immediately. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Grandpa Ethan had talked about, the chance to learn from someone who really understood the business. What I didn't expect was how personal the mentorship would become. Our monthly one-on-ones started as strictly professional check-ins, but Derek was easy to talk to, and before long we were discussing everything from career goals to life philosophy. You remind me of myself when I was starting out, he told me during one of our coffee meetings. Hungry to learn, willing to put in the work, but maybe a little too focused on proving yourself. Don't forget to enjoy the journey, Alex. Success means nothing if you're miserable getting there. I appreciated the advice, even if I couldn't tell him that my relationship with success was more complicated than he realized. But Derek felt like the father figure. I'd never really had someone who believed in my potential, without constantly comparing me to someone else. He started inviting me to client meetings, strategy sessions, even the occasional company social event. I was still junior level on paper, but Derek was giving me access to the kind of experience that usually took years to earn. You're going places, Alex, he'd say. I can see it. You've got that rare combination of analytical thinking and emotional intelligence that makes for real leadership. For 2 years, life at Reynolds felt like everything I'd hoped for. I was learning, growing, building real relationships. Maya and I were practically attached at the hip. Derek was becoming the mentor I'd always wanted, and I was finally starting to feel like I belonged somewhere. But then, Lily graduated from college and everything started to change. My sister had majored in creative writing with a minor in theater, which wasn't exactly opening a lot of doors in the job market. She'd moved back home with my parents and was struggling to find direction. Every family dinner became a referendum on Lily's future, with my parents alternating between worry and frustration. She's so talented, my mother would say, but she just can't seem to find her place. I felt bad for Lily. I really did. We'd never been particularly close, but I didn't want to see her struggling. So when Reynolds posted an opening for a content marketing coordinator, I thought of her immediately. Lily's really creative, I told Derek during one of our one-on-ones. She's got a background in writing, she understands social media, and she's got this natural charisma that I think would work really well in content marketing. Or Derek trusted my judgment enough to agree to an interview, and Lily absolutely nailed it. She was charming, enthusiastic, full of ideas about how to make Reynolds' social media presence more engaging and authentic. Your sister's impressive, Derek told me after the interview. She's got a completely different energy than you do, but I can see the family resemblance. You both have this way of seeing angles that other people miss. Lily started the following Monday, and at first everything seemed perfect. She was grateful, excited, full of energy about her new role. We'd have lunch together sometimes, and she'd bounce ideas off me about campaigns she was working on. I can't believe you got me this opportunity, she said during her second week. I was starting to think I'd never find something that was actually a good fit. I was proud of her, genuinely happy to see her thriving. For a few weeks, it felt like maybe we could finally have the kind of sisterly relationship I'd always wanted. But then I started noticing small changes. It began with lunch. Maya, Lily, and I would eat together sometimes, and Lily would tell these animated stories about college, about theater production she'd been in, about adventures she'd had studying abroad. Maya was completely charmed. Your sister is hilarious, Maya told me. That story about the time she accidentally joined a flash mob in Rome, I was crying. I was happy that they got along, really. But there was something in the way Maya looked at Lily when she talked, something that felt different from how she looked at me. Like Lily was more interesting, more vibrant, more worth paying attention to. Then the lunch invitation stopped, including me. Oh, we were just grabbing something quick, Maya would say when I'd run into them coming back from a restaurant I'd never heard of. Didn't want to bother you since you seemed busy. But I hadn't been busy. I'd been sitting at my desk eating a sad sandwich, wondering why my best friend and my sister were suddenly having adventures without me. The exclusion was subtle at first. A group text about weekend plans that somehow didn't include me. Inside jokes that I wasn't part of. Conversations that would stop when I walked up, then resume after I left. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into normal workplace dynamics. Maya and Lily were both outgoing social people. Of course, they'd hit it off. That didn't mean anything was wrong. But then came the company holiday party. Reynolds always went all out for their holiday celebrations. This year, they'd rented out the ballroom at one of the nicest hotels downtown. Everyone was dressed up, the drinks were flowing, and the energy was festive and relaxed. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Maya and I had even gone shopping together for dresses, making a whole day of it with lunch and mimosas. It felt like old times. But at the party, Maya was glued to Lily's side. They worked the room together, laughing and charming everyone they met. I'd try to join their conversations, but somehow I always felt like the third wheel, like I was interrupting something. Alex? Derek appeared at my elbow, looking handsome in his navy suit. Having fun? Absolutely, I lied, taking a sip of my wine and trying to look like I belonged. Your sister's quite the hit, he said, nodding toward where Lily was holding court with a group of senior executives telling some story that had them all laughing. She's got that spark, that thing that makes people want to be around her. I nodded, watching Lily charm people who barely knew my name, despite the fact that I'd been working twice as hard for twice as long. Different strengths, Derek continued. You're the strategic thinker, the one who sees the big picture. But Lily, she's got that natural magnetism that's really valuable in client-facing roles. I knew he meant it as a compliment, but it stung anyway. It was the same comparison I'd been hearing my entire life, just dressed up in corporate language. But what really bothered me was what I saw next. I was coming back from the bathroom when I spotted Maya deep in conversation with someone I recognized, but had never actually met. Sophie Chang, the CEO's wife. She occasionally showed up at company events, but usually kept to herself. I couldn't hear what they were talking about, but Sophie was leaning in, close speaking, intently, while Maya nodded and took notes on her phone. It struck me as odd. What would the CEO's wife want to discuss privately with someone in client relations? When Maya saw me approaching, she quickly put her phone away and smiled brightly. Alex, there you are. I was just meeting Sophie. She was telling me about some charity work she's involved in. Sophie smiled politely and excused herself, but something about the interaction felt off. The body language had been too intense for casual charity chat, and Maya's explanation felt rehearsed. I almost asked Maya about it later, but Lily appeared and immediately launched into a story about one of the executives hitting on her by the shrimp cocktail station, and the moment passed. That night driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface of my carefully constructed life at Reynolds. The relationships I'd built, the trust I'd earned, the sense of belonging I'd finally found. It all felt suddenly fragile. I'd spent 12 years being patient, being strategic, building my position piece by piece like one of Grandpa Ethan's chess games. But now, for the first time, I wondered if I'd been so focused on the long game that I'd missed what was happening right in front of me. Maya and Lily were becoming a team, and I was becoming the outsider. I just had no idea how much of an outsider I was about to become. 3 months after that holiday party, Reynolds announced our annual leadership retreat in Aspen. These retreats were legendary in the company, partly for the stunning mountain setting, but mostly because they were where the real decisions got made. Who was being groomed for promotion, which projects were getting priority funding, whose ideas would shape the company's future. I'd been to 2 of these retreats before, and they'd been career-defining experiences. The informal setting made networking easier, and the extended time together meant you could have the kind of deep strategic conversations that were impossible in the daily grind of office life. This year felt different from the moment we arrived at the resort. The place was gorgeous, all rustic luxury with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-capped peaks. But something had shifted in the company dynamics, and I could feel it immediately. Lily was in her element. The retreat format played perfectly to her strengths. The social aspects, the group dinners, the casual conversations by the fireplace where real influence was traded. I watched her work the room like she'd been doing this for years instead of months. Lily's really found her groove, Derek commented during our first evening reception. She's got this natural ability to connect with people across all levels of the organization. That's a rare skill. I nodded and smiled. But inside, I was calculating. In the 6 months since Lily had joined the company, she'd somehow positioned herself as indispensable to people who outranked her by decades. Meanwhile, I felt like I was becoming invisible, despite being one of the most productive members of my team. The retreat agenda was packed with workshops, strategy sessions, and team-building activities. I'd been asked to lead a session on market analysis and competitive intelligence, which should have been exciting. This was my expertise, my chance to showcase the strategic thinking that Derek had always praised. But when I got to the conference room for my workshop, half the chairs were empty. The people who did show up seemed distracted checking their phones, having side conversations. It felt like they were there out of obligation rather than genuine interest. I pushed through anyway, presenting insights I'd spent weeks developing, walking through competitive analyses that I knew could save the company significant resources. A few people asked good questions, but the energy in the room was flat. "Great work as always, Alex," Derek said afterward, but his praise felt perfunctory. He was already looking past me toward the door where Lily was holding court with a group of senior executives. Meanwhile, Lily's session on authentic brand storytelling was standing room only. I slipped in the back and watched her command the room with the kind of effortless charisma I'd never possessed. She had them laughing, nodding, taking notes on everything she said. "The key to authentic storytelling," Lily was saying, "is remembering that people don't connect with companies, they connect with people. Every brand needs to have a human heart, a personality that feels real and relatable." It was good advice delivered with the kind of passionate conviction that made you want to believe everything she said. I had to admit, my sister was talented, but watching her receive the kind of enthusiastic reception that my carefully researched presentations never generated was like swallowing glass. After her session, the executives surrounded her with follow-up questions and invitations to dinner. I tried to join one of these conversations, but somehow I always found myself on the periphery, listening to other people discuss Lily's ideas while my own contributions went unnoticed. The worst part was watching Maya. My best friend, the person I'd trusted more than anyone in the company, was completely wrapped up in Lily's orbit. They sat together at every meal, walked to sessions together, shared inside jokes that I wasn't part of. During one group dinner, I found myself sitting alone at the end of the table while Maya and Lily entertained the entire group with stories. I picked at my salmon and wondered how I'd become so irrelevant so quickly. "You've been quiet tonight," Derek said, taking the seat next to me. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I lied. "It's been a long day." "This retreat format can be overwhelming," he agreed. "Some people thrive on the social energy, others find it draining. You're more of a behind-the-scenes strategist anyway." "That's valuable too." "Behind the scenes, valuable too." The words felt like a consolation prize. After dinner, I went back to my room while everyone else headed to the bar for more networking. I sat by the window, looking out at the mountains, and tried to understand what was happening to my career. I'd been at Reynolds for 12 years. I'd consistently delivered excellent work, built strong relationships, earned the respect of my colleagues. But somehow, in the space of 6 months, I'd been eclipsed by my sister who'd been there for barely half a year. The next morning brought the retreat's signature event, small group strategy sessions, where teams were formed to tackle real company challenges. These sessions were where you proved your leadership potential, where future promotions were often decided. I expected to be grouped with Derek and the other marketing leads, But when the teams were announced, I found myself assigned to a lower priority project with mostly junior staff. Meanwhile, Lily was placed on the high visibility team working on the company's 5-year growth strategy. "There must be some mistake," I said to Derek during a break. "I think I was assigned to the wrong group." Derek looked uncomfortable. "Actually, Alex, we thought this project would be a good fit for your analytical skills. The growth strategy team needs more creative energy, and Lily brings that perspective." Creative energy. There it was again, the subtle suggestion that my strengths were somehow less valuable, less exciting, less worthy of attention. I spent the next 2 days working on a project that felt like busy work, while Lily's team developed presentations for the CAO. When it came time to present our findings, my group session was scheduled during lunch, while Lily's team got the prime afternoon slot with full executive attendance. But it was the private meetings that really bothered me. Throughout the retreat, I kept noticing Derek, Maya, and Lily having conversations that would stop when I approached, coffee chats that I wasn't invited to, strategy discussions that seemed to happen without me. On our last night, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The resort had beautiful hiking trails, and I needed some time alone to process everything that had happened. As I was coming back, I saw them through the window of the executive lounge, Derek, Maya, Lily, and 2 other senior leaders deep in animated conversation over drinks. They looked like they were planning something important. And I clearly wasn't part of it. The flight home was miserable. I sat by myself while Maya and Lily shared snacks and whispered about inside jokes from the retreat. When we landed, I felt like I was returning to a company where I no longer belonged. I was right to be worried. Within a week of our return, Reynolds landed its biggest client opportunity in years. Meridian Corporation, a Fortune 500 company, wanted a complete rebranding combined with a digital transformation strategy. It was exactly the kind of high-profile project that could define someone's career. "This is huge for us," Derek announced during our team meeting. "Meridian is looking for a comprehensive approach that combines brand identity, market positioning, and technology integration. It's worth about $4 million in revenue." I felt my pulse quicken. This was the kind of project I'd been preparing for my entire career. Complex strategic challenge, multiple stakeholders, significant business impact. Everything I'd learned over 12 years at Reynolds had been building toward this moment. "I'd like to take the lead on developing our proposal," I said. "I've been analyzing Meridian's market position, and I have some ideas about how we could approach their challenges." Derek nodded. "That sounds great, Alex. Why don't you pull together some initial thoughts, and we'll review them next week?" I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. I spent every evening and weekend researching Meridian's business, studying their competitors, analyzing their customer base. I mapped out their entire value chain, identified gaps in their current strategy, and developed a comprehensive approach that addressed every aspect of their transformation needs. The proposal I created was the best work of my career. 60 pages of detailed analysis, strategic recommendations, and implementation timelines. I'd even included financial projections showing how our approach could increase their market share by 15% within 2 years. When I presented it to Derek, his eyes lit up. "Alex, this is incredible work. You've thought through every angle, anticipated every challenge." This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that sets us apart from our competitors. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. This was what I was good at, what I brought to the table that nobody else could match. "Let's schedule a presentation for the full team," Derek continued. "I want everyone to see this before we finalize our approach." The presentation went even better than I'd hoped. The conference room was packed with senior leaders who asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely excited about the strategy. Maya took detailed notes, Lily nodded approvingly, and Derek beamed like a proud mentor. "Outstanding work, Alex," the CEO said afterward. "This is the kind of comprehensive thinking that wins major accounts." I walked out of that room feeling like I'd reclaimed my place at Reynolds. All those months of feeling sidelined, all the subtle slights and exclusions. They seemed insignificant compared to the recognition I just received for my strategic capabilities. But then something strange started happening. The follow-up meetings began occurring without me. "Oh, we're just discussing implementation details," Maya explained when I asked why I hadn't been invited to a strategy session. "Nothing that requires your level of strategic input." Then Lily was assigned as the primary point person for client communications. "She's got that creative communication style that clients love," Derek told me. "You've done the heavy lifting on strategy. Now we need someone who can sell the vision." Maya was named supervising strategist responsible for translating my analysis into client-facing materials. "You know how busy you are with other projects," she said. "I can handle the presentation development so you don't have to worry about it." Within 2 weeks, I was completely frozen out of the project I'd created. When I tried to join planning meetings, I was told they were full. When I asked to review client materials, I was told they were still in development. Finally, I got access to the meeting notes from a strategy session I hadn't been invited to. I scanned through pages of discussion about budget allocation, timeline management, and resource assignment. My name wasn't mentioned once. Not as the project originator, not as a contributing team member, not even as a consultant. It was like I'd never existed. I called Maya immediately. "Hey, I just saw the meeting notes from Tuesday's strategy session. I think there might be an error. It doesn't mention my role in developing the initial proposal." There was a pause. "Alex, maybe you're reading too much into this. Those notes weren't meant to be comprehensive. Everyone knows you did the initial research." "But Maya, this was my project. I spent months developing that strategy." "I think you might be a little stressed about this," Maya said, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. Condescending, dismissive. "You've been working so hard lately, maybe you're overthinking things. The important thing is that we deliver great work for the client, right?" I hung up feeling like I'd been slapped. Maya was gaslighting me, making me question my own perception of reality. But I knew what I'd experienced. I'd created that proposal, and now my name was being systematically erased from it. That's when I started paying attention to other changes happening around me. I was removed from several group email lists, supposedly to reduce inbox clutter. Colleagues who used to stop by my desk for casual conversations suddenly seemed too busy to chat. My input wasn't requested for projects where I'd previously been considered an essential contributor. Most telling of all, my desk was moved. "We're reorganizing the floor plan to optimize collaboration," HR explained. My new workspace was in a corner near the supply closet, isolated from the marketing team I'd been part of for over a decade. I wasn't stupid. I could see the pattern. Someone was systematically marginalizing me, removing me from the center of influence, while making it look like natural organizational evolution. That night, I did something I'd never thought I'd need to do. I started backing up my emails, downloading files, documenting every interaction and decision that might be relevant later. If someone was building a case against me, I was going to be prepared. I also made a call I'd been avoiding. "Jordan, it's Alex Monroe. I need to talk to you about something that's happening at Reynolds." Jordan Cho had been Grandpa Ethan's attorney for 30 years and had managed my trust with complete discretion. She was also one of the smartest people I'd ever met, with an instinct for corporate politics that bordered on supernatural. We met for coffee the next morning at a place far from Reynolds' downtown office. "Tell me everything," Jordan said, pulling out a legal pad and pen. I walked her through the last 6 months, Lily's hiring, Maya's growing distance, the Aspen retreat, the stolen project, the systematic exclusion from meetings and decisions. Jordan took notes without interrupting, asking clarifying questions about timelines and specific individuals. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "Alex, what you're describing sounds like a coordinated effort to marginalize you within the organization. The question is whether this is personal, professional, or something else entirely." "What do you mean, something else?" "Well, you've been there for 12 years. You're well-regarded, productive, and you have institutional knowledge that would be difficult to replace. From a business perspective, there's no logical reason to sideline you unless someone has a specific agenda. Jordan tapped her pen against her legal pad. My advice is to watch, document, and prepare. Don't react emotionally. Don't confront anyone directly, and don't let them know you're aware of what's happening. If this is what I think it is, they're building towards something bigger. What kind of something bigger? The kind that's going to require you to make a choice about whether you want to keep playing the long game or whether it's time to remind people who they're really dealing with. I drove back to the office with Jordan's words echoing in my mind. For 12 years, I'd been the patient strategist, building my position piece by piece, never revealing my true power. But patience had a cost, and I was starting to realize that cost might be everything I'd worked to build. As I walked back into the Reynolds building, past the lobby where my grandfather's portrait hung with other major donors, I wondered if the time for invisibility was coming to an end. Because if Maya, Derek, and Lily thought they could erase me from my own company, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. These meetings were always a big deal at Reynolds, where department heads presented their progress, celebrated wins, and outlined upcoming strategies. I'd presented at several of them over the years, and they were always career-defining moments. This time, I wasn't presenting. But my work was. I sat in the back of the auditorium watching as Lily took the stage with a confidence that made my stomach turn. She looked polished, professional, every inch the rising star that everyone believed her to be. Today, I want to share our approach to the Meridian Corporation project. She began clicking to her first slide. This represents the future of integrated brand strategy, combining traditional marketing with cutting-edge digital transformation. I watched in horrified fascination as Lily walked through my proposal. Oh, she'd changed things. Different fonts, some reordered sections, a few updated graphics. But the core strategy, the competitive analysis, the implementation timeline, the financial projections, it was all mine. She'd even kept some of my exact phrasing. I'd written about creating authentic customer journeys that bridge digital and physical touchpoints. And there it was, coming out of my sister's mouth like she'd thought of it herself. The audience was eating it up. Senior executives were nodding approvingly, taking notes, leaning forward in their seats. When Lily finished, the applause was enthusiastic and sustained. Derek stood up from the front row. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that sets Reynolds apart from our competitors. Lily, your leadership on this project has been exceptional. My hands were shaking in my lap. Exceptional leadership on a project that had been my idea, my research, my strategy. But it was Maya's comment that really broke me. She stood up beaming at Lily like a proud parent. I just want to add that working with Lily on this project has been inspiring. Her creative vision combined with her natural leadership abilities represents the future of this company. I genuinely believe Lily is going to revolutionize how we approach client strategy. The future of this company. The company I owned. They were talking about my sister, like she was the next generation of leadership, while systematically erasing my contributions. I couldn't sit there anymore. I got up quietly and slipped out of the auditorium, heading for the parking garage, where I could think clearly without pretending to smile. I was standing next to my car, trying to process what I'd just witnessed when Lily appeared. Alex, wait. She looked flushed from her presentation, high confident in a way I'd never seen her before. That was quite a presentation, I said, keeping my voice level. Look, I know you're upset about the project, but you need to understand something. I didn't steal anything from you. I built on your initial research, yes, but I turned it into something bigger, something that actually resonates with people. I stared at her. Lily, that was my strategy. Every major component of that presentation came from work I did. You did research, Alex. I created vision. Her voice was getting heated now, dropping the careful, professional tone she'd been using upstairs. You're good at analyzing data and making spreadsheets, but you don't know how to inspire people. You don't know how to sell ideas. So that justifies taking credit for my work. Lily's eyes flashed with something I'd never seen before. Raw anger, years of resentment finally boiling over. "I'm tired of being your shadow," she said, stepping closer. "Do you know what it's like growing up with a sister who's supposedly perfect at everything, who gets praised for every tiny achievement, while nothing I do is ever good enough?" "Lily, that's not how it was. Isn't it you were the golden child, the one who always had her life figured out? Meanwhile, I was the creative one, the dreamer, the one who didn't fit into mom and dad's idea of success. Well, guess what, Alex? I deserve this. I deserve to be recognized for my talents. But these aren't your talents, this is my work. Your work that was sitting in a file going nowhere until I turned it into something people actually cared about. You can analyze markets all day long, but you can't connect with people. You can't make them believe in something bigger than themselves." The worst part was that she was right about some of it. I wasn't charismatic like Lily. I didn't have her natural ability to charm a room or make people fall in love with an idea, but that didn't mean my contributions were worthless. "I can't believe you're doing this," I said. "I'm not doing anything except finally stepping out of your shadow. And if you can't handle that, maybe you should think about whether Reynolds is really the right place for you." She walked away, leaving me standing in the parking garage with a horrible realization that my own sister saw me as an obstacle to be removed rather than a teammate to collaborate with. 2 days later, I got the call from HR. "Alex, we need you to come in for a meeting this afternoon, 2 o'clock. I knew immediately that this wasn't routine. HR meetings were usually scheduled days in advance with agenda items and preparation materials. Emergency calls meant trouble. I spent the morning trying to focus on work, but my mind kept racing through possibilities. Had someone discovered my ownership stake? Had Lily complained about our parking garage conversation? Was this connected to the Meridian project somehow? At 2 o'clock, I walked into that sterile conference room where my career at Reynolds would effectively end. Derek was there looking uncomfortable. Maya sat across from him, her eyes red like she'd been crying. And Lily was next to Maya, looking scared but determined. The HR manager, Patricia Wells, had a thick file in front of her. "Alex, we've received some concerning reports about your behavior over the past several months. We need to discuss what appears to be a pattern of hostility toward your colleagues." Pattern of hostility. I felt like I was in a nightmare where words had lost all meaning. "I'm sorry, what kind of hostility?" Patricia opened her file. "We have multiple reports of you being confrontational with team members, resistant to collaborative projects, and creating an uncomfortable work environment for other employees." "Can you be more specific?" She looked at Derek, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Alex, several people have mentioned that you've become increasingly difficult to work with, questioning decisions, challenging authority, making people feel like their contributions aren't valued." This was surreal. I was being accused of the exact behavior that had been directed at me for months. "I think there may be some misunderstanding here," I said carefully. "Can you give me specific examples of these behaviors?" Maya spoke up, then her voice shaky with emotion. "Alex, this is really hard for me to say because I care about you so much, but your behavior toward Lily has been unacceptable." I turned to look at my former best friend, the person I'd trusted more than anyone in the company. "What do you mean, the way you've been undermining her work, questioning her capabilities, making her feel unwelcome on projects?" Lily came to me in tears after you confronted her about the Meridian presentation. She was so upset about how hostile you'd been. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Maya Lily was presenting work that I had developed. I had legitimate concerns about project attribution. "See, this is exactly what we're talking about," Derek interjected. "You can't seem to accept that other people might build on your initial ideas and take them in new directions. That's how collaboration works, Alex." Lily finally spoke, her voice small and wounded. "I've tried so hard to have a good relationship with you, both as your sister and as your colleague, but you've made it clear that you see me as competition rather than family." I looked around the room at these people I'd trusted, people I'd considered friends and mentors, and realized they'd constructed a narrative where I was the villain, Every attempt I'd made to advocate for myself had been reframed as hostility. Every question I'd asked about my exclusion had been reinterpreted as resistance to collaboration. This is a coordinated effort to push me out, I said, finally naming what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. Patricia shook her head. Alex, that kind of paranoid thinking is exactly what we're concerned about. Multiple people have independently expressed concerns about your behavior. Independently? I looked at Maya and Lily, who'd been inseparable for months. How independent can these concerns be when the people making them spend all their time together? You're proving our point, Derek said. You're being defensive accusatory, unwilling to accept feedback about your performance. It was masterful, really. They'd created a situation where any attempt to defend myself only provided more evidence of the behavioral problems they were alleging. Maya leaned forward, tears streaming down her face now. Alex, I love you like a sister, but I can't watch you destroy your career like this. The hostility, the paranoia, the way you've been treating Lily, it's not the person I thought I knew. The tears looked real. The emotion in her voice sounded genuine. For a moment, I almost believed her, almost wondered if I really had been losing my grip on reality. But then, I remembered the private meetings, the stolen project, the systematic exclusion from decisions. I remembered Sophie Chang whispering to Maya at the holiday party, and Derek praising Lily for work that had been mine. You're gaslighting me, I said quietly. Alex, Patricia's voice was firm now. This kind of hostile language toward your colleagues is exactly what we're addressing. We're going to have to ask you to take some time off while we review your status with the company. Time off. Effective immediately, your access will be suspended while we conduct a full review of the situation. Security was already at the door. The same guards who'd escorted me out after I was fired, except this time it was happening in slow motion, with the pretense of process and documentation. They walked me to my desk while I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box. 12 years of my professional life reduced to a collection of coffee mugs, picture frames, and desk plants. As I was walking toward the elevator, Maya appeared at my side. Alex, I really hope you get the help you need, she said loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Should have played the game better. The elevator doors closed, and I stood there holding my pathetic box of belongings, finally understanding the full scope of what had been done to me. They'd stolen my work, destroyed my reputation, and engineered my removal from the company, all while making it look like I'd brought it on myself through my own behavioral problems. I sat in my car, in the parking garage for a long time, staring at the building where I'd spent 12 years building a career that had just been demolished in a single afternoon. Then, I pulled out my phone and made the call I should have made months ago. Jordan, it's Alex. It's time. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I was wondering when you'd finally decide to stop playing defense. Are you ready to remind them who they're really dealing with? More than ready. Good. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning. We have a lot of work to do. That night, Jordan and I met at her law firm's conference room. She'd been busy since our last conversation, conducting what she called a preliminary investigation into the situation at Reynolds. Alex, what happened to you wasn't random workplace politics. This was a coordinated campaign, and now I know why. She spread a series of documents across the conference table. Financial reports, email records, vendor contracts, personnel files. Derek Saunders has been planning to leave Reynolds for months. He's been in talks with a startup about becoming their VP of marketing. But he wants to take some key personnel with him when he goes. I looked at the documents she was showing me. Email chains between Derek and external recruiters, discussions about talent acquisition and strategic departures. Maya and Lily, among others. But here's the interesting part. Derek's been advocating internally for the sale of Reynolds' R&D division. He's been telling the board it's a money pit, that the company should focus on client services instead of product development. Jordan pulled out another set of financial reports. Except the R&D division is actually quite profitable. It generates about 30% of the company's net income, but Derek's been manipulating the accounting to make it look like a cost center. Why would he want to sell a profitable division? Because his new startup wants to acquire it at below market value. Derek gets a finder's fee plus equity in the new company. It's a classic inside job. My head was spinning. And Maya? Jordan smiled grimly. Maya's been working with Sophie Cheng to steer vendor contracts toward companies they have financial interests in. That consulting firm Sophie recommended Maya's boyfriend is a partner there. They're about to receive a $1.8 million contract for work that could easily be done in-house. This is fraud. Multiple types of fraud. But here's the beautiful part, Alex. They needed you out of the way because your analytical skills would have caught these discrepancies eventually. You're too good at following the money, too detail-oriented to miss the kind of accounting irregularities they've been creating. I thought about all the financial reports I'd been excluded from all the budget meetings I hadn't been invited to. They'd been hiding their scheme in plain sight, using my marginalization to cover their tracks. And Lily, Jordan's expression softened slightly. Lily's the useful idiot. She genuinely believes she deserves the recognition she's been getting, but she's also been fed information designed to turn her against you. They've been using her resentment and ambition to provide cover for their real agenda. She pulled out one more document. Lily submitted a budget proposal last week that would eliminate your entire former team. 15 people who've been with the company for years, including some who might have noticed the financial irregularities. I felt sick, not just because of the betrayal, but because of how perfectly they'd played all of us. Derek had used my mentorship relationship to gain access to confidential information. Maya had used our friendship to monitor my activities and feed me disinformation. And Lily had used our family connection to provide emotional cover for what was essentially corporate espionage. So what do we do now? Jordan's smile was sharp as a blade. Now we remind them that they just declared war on the majority shareholder of their own company. And, Alex, when this is over, they're going to wish they'd never heard your name. The next morning, Jordan's forensic accounting team descended on Reynolds Tech like a SWAT team with calculators. As the majority shareholder, I had the legal right to demand a full audit of company finances, and Jordan had prepared the paperwork to make it airtight. But that was just the beginning, because Derek, Maya, and Lily had made one crucial mistake in their campaign against me. They'd forgotten that the quiet, analytical woman they'd pushed around for months wasn't just another employee they could eliminate. I was their boss, and I was about to start acting like it. The week after my termination was the darkest period of my adult life. I'd lost my job, my closest friendships, and my sense of identity, all in the span of a single afternoon. I spent the first few days in my apartment, cycling between rage and despair, trying to make sense of how everything had gone so wrong, so quickly. Jordan was handling the legal aspects of our response, but she was also the one who sat me down and had the conversation I needed to hear. Alex, what happened to you was traumatic. You need to process this properly before we move forward, or you're going to make decisions from a place of hurt rather than strategy. She gave me the name of a therapist, Dr. Evelyn Green, who specialized in workplace trauma and corporate betrayal. I almost didn't call her. The idea of sitting in a therapy office talking about my feelings seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford when I had a company to save. But Jordan was insistent. You've been playing chess for 12 years, and you just discovered that your opponents have been cheating the entire game. You need to clear your head before you make your next move. Dr. Green's office was in a quiet building downtown, all warm wood and soft lighting that was probably designed to make people feel safe enough to fall apart. Which is exactly what I did during our first session. Tell me about the relationships that were damaged, she said after I'd given her the basic outline of what had happened. Derek was like a father figure to me. For 5 years, he mentored me, praised my work, made me feel like I had real potential for leadership. And Maya? I had to pause because talking about Maya was like pressing on a bruise. Maya was my best friend. I trusted her with everything. And how does it feel to realize that these relationships weren't what you thought they were? Like I'm an idiot for not seeing it sooner. Like I'm naive for believing people actually cared about me instead of just using me. Dr. Green leaned forward slightly. Alex, what you experienced is called corporate betrayal trauma. It's a recognized psychological phenomenon that occurs when people in positions of trust systematically undermine your reality while maintaining the appearance of support. She explained how gaslighting worked in professional environments, how abusers could manipulate situations to make their victims question their own perceptions and judgments, how isolation tactics were used to cut people off from support systems and alternative perspectives. The people who did this to you are skilled manipulators, she said. The fact that you trusted them doesn't make you naive. It makes you human. Those words hit me harder than I expected. For weeks, I'd been telling myself that I should have seen the signs, should have been smarter, should have protected myself better. But Dr. Green was right. I'd been targeted by people who were expert at deception. Over the next 2 weeks, I established a routine that slowly brought me back to myself. Morning jogs through the neighborhood, clearing my head and rebuilding my physical strength. Afternoons reviewing financial documents and business reports with Jordan's team, understanding exactly how deep the corruption at Reynolds went. Evenings, journaling, processing the emotional aftermath of the betrayal while planning my strategic response. It was during one of those journal sessions that I realized something important. I'd spent 12 years trying to earn love and recognition from people who were never capable of giving it authentically. Derek had seen me as a useful source of information and analysis, not a person worthy of genuine mentorship. Maya had valued our friendship only as long as it served her purposes. Even Lily had been willing to sacrifice our relationship for her own advancement, but none of that changed who I actually was or what I was capable of achieving. I called my old college roommate Jamila, who was now running her own consulting firm in Seattle. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, but talking to her reminded me of who I'd been before Reynolds, before all the careful calculations and strategic patience. "Girl, you sound like you've been living in somebody else's story," she said, after I'd told her everything. The Alex I knew in college wouldn't have let people walk all over her like that. I was trying to be strategic to build relationships and earn respect gradually. And how did that work out for you? The question stung because it was so accurate. Not great. Listen, Alex, they try to take your name, but they can't take your power. You own that company, right? So stop acting like you need their permission to claim what's already yours. Jamila was right. I'd been so focused on earning acceptance that I'd forgotten I didn't need it. I was the majority shareholder of Reynolds Tech. I didn't need Derek's mentorship or Maya's friendship or Lily's approval. I had the legal authority to reshape the company however I saw fit. That realization shifted something fundamental in how I approached the situation. Instead of planning a defensive response to their attacks, I started designing an offensive strategy to reclaim control. I spent the next week studying everything I could find about ethical leadership and corporate turnarounds. I read case studies of companies that had recovered from internal corruption, analyzed successful management transitions, and developed a comprehensive plan for Reynolds' future. The plan wasn't about revenge, although there would definitely be consequences for the people who'd betrayed the company's trust. It was about creating the kind of organization that Grandpa Ethan had envisioned when he built Reynolds from nothing. A place where talent was genuinely valued, where ethical behavior was rewarded, and where success was measured by more than just short-term profits. I also spent time preparing myself psychologically for what was coming. The boardroom confrontation wouldn't just be about presenting evidence of financial fraud. It would be about reclaiming my identity and authority after months of systematic undermining. The night before the board meeting, I stood in front of my closet choosing what to wear. For 12 years, I dressed to blend in, to be professional, but not threatening. Tomorrow, I needed to look like the majority shareholder of a major corporation. I selected a charcoal gray suit that I'd never worn to the office, paired with the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. Simple, elegant, powerful without being flashy. As I was getting ready to leave, I picked up one more item, the small chess queen piece that Grandpa Ethan had given me when I was 8 years old after I'd beaten him for the first time. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board, he'd told me that day. She can move in any direction as far as she wants, but her real power comes from the fact that nobody sees her coming until it's too late. I slipped the chess piece into my jacket pocket. Let's go reclaim the board. Jordan had arranged for the board meeting under the pretense of an urgent budget review. The board members thought they were gathering to discuss the quarterly financials that Derek had been manipulating. They had no idea they were about to witness a complete changing of the guard. The boardroom at Reynolds was on the 20th floor, all glass and steel with a view of the downtown skyline. I'd been in this room dozens of times over the years for presentations and strategy sessions, but I'd always been there as a mid-level employee seeking approval for my ideas. Today, I was walking in as the boss. Jordan and her legal team arrived, first setting up their materials and connecting their laptops to the presentation system. The forensic evidence we'd gathered was damning. Falsified financial reports, fraudulent vendor contracts, evidence of planned asset stripping, and documentation of the coordinated campaign to remove me from the company. The board members began filing in at 9 o'clock sharp. Linda Flores, the board chairwoman and former CEO of a major consulting firm. Robert Chen, who'd built his own tech company before selling it and joining the Reynolds board. Patricia Vance, a finance expert who'd been tracking our quarterly performance for 3 years. These were serious people, successful in their own right, who'd agreed to provide oversight for Reynolds because they believed in the company's mission and potential. Derek arrived 10 minutes late, looking confident and relaxed. He was followed by Maya, who was attending as the newly promoted Director of Strategic Development, a title that hadn't existed 6 months ago. Lily wasn't there since she wasn't senior enough to attend board meetings, but her presence would be felt when we discussed the budget proposal she'd submitted. "Good morning, everyone," Derek said, taking his seat at the table. "I appreciate you all making time for this urgent review. As you know, we're facing some significant budget challenges that require immediate attention." Linda Flores nodded. "Derek, we've all reviewed the preliminary materials you sent. The R&D division losses are concerning, and the proposed restructuring seems necessary, though painful." "Exactly. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions to ensure the company's long-term viability." That was my cue. The conference room door opened, and I walked in with Jordan and her legal team. The silence that followed was profound. You could have heard a pen drop. Derek's confident expression melted into confusion, then alarm. "Alex, what are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting." I took the seat directly across from him, placing my hands calmly on the table. "Good morning, Derek. Good morning, everyone." Linda Flores looked puzzled. "I'm sorry, Ms. Monroe, but this is a board meeting. While we appreciate your dedication to the company, this isn't appropriate." Derek stood up, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used to dismiss me so many times before. "Alex, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're no longer an employee of this company, and you have no business being in this meeting." Jordan stood up beside me, her voice crisp and professional. "Actually, Mr. Saunders, Ms. Monroe is here in her capacity as majority shareholder of Reynolds Tech." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Derek laughed, a sound that was half confusion and half dismissal. "I'm sorry, that's impossible." Maya was staring at me like I just announced I was an alien. "Alex, what is she talking about?" Jordan opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of legal documents. "Ms. Monroe has been the beneficial owner of 65% of Reynolds Tech for the past 12 years, through a trust established by her grandfather, Ethan Monroe, who founded this company." Robert Chen leaned forward, his expression shifting from confusion to intense interest. "Ethan Monroe was your grandfather." "He was," I said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. "He left me controlling interest in the company with the instruction to learn the business from the ground up to understand how it really operated before revealing my ownership stake." Linda Flores was scanning the documents Jordan had placed in front of her. "These appear to be legitimate trust documents. Jordan, you're representing Ms. Monroe in this capacity." "I am. I was also Mr. Ethan Monroe's attorney and have been managing this trust since his death 12 years ago." Derek was still standing, but his face had gone pale. This is ridiculous. Alex, even if this is true, which I seriously doubt, it doesn't change the fact that you were terminated for behavioral issues. You can't just walk in here and disrupt a board meeting. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 12 years of careful planning and patient strategy settling on my shoulders like armor. Derek, the only disruption happening here is the systematic fraud you've been committing against this company. I looked around the table at the board members, making eye contact with each of them. And Maya, the vendor kickback scheme you've been running with Sophie Chang. Maya gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Alex, you're having some kind of breakdown. This is paranoid behavior? Is it? Jordan clicked to her first slide, displaying a series of financial reports side by side. Because we have documentation of falsified quarterly reports, manipulated R&D accounting, and evidence of planned asset stripping that would have cost this company millions of dollars. The room went completely silent as the board members began processing what they were seeing. Derek tried one more time to regain control. This is obviously a desperate attempt to avoid accountability for serious behavioral issues. Alex has been displaying increasingly erratic behavior for months. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out Grandpa Ethan's chess queen, setting it gently on the conference table in front of me. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board, I said, my voice calm and steady. But her real power comes from the fact that nobody sees her coming until it's too late. Then I looked directly at Derek and let him see 12 years of strategic patience crystallizing into absolute authority. Mr. Saunders, you're fired. The silence in that boardroom was deafening. Derek stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and what looked like genuine fear. Maya had gone completely white, gripping the edge of the conference table, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. You can't fire me, Derek finally said, his voice cracking slightly. I don't work for you. I work for this company, for this board. Derek, Linda Flores said quietly, if these documents are authentic, then Alex is the majority shareholder. She absolutely has the authority to terminate your employment. Jordan clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed breakdown of the financial discrepancies we'd uncovered. What you're looking at here are the real numbers for Reynolds Tech's R&D division, compared to the reports that Mr. Saunders has been presenting to the board. The difference was staggering. Where Derek's reports showed R&D as a money-losing operation that drained 30% of the company's resources, the actual financials revealed it as the most profitable division, generating 30% of net profits. Robert Chen was studying the numbers intently. These can't be right. We've been discussing the R&D losses for months. That's because Mr. Saunders has been systematically falsifying the reports, Jordan explained. He's been moving R&D revenues into other budget categories while inflating the cost allocations. The goal was to make the division appear unprofitable, so he could recommend its sale to a startup he has financial ties to. I watched Derek's face as the board members began to understand the scope of his deception. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. This is insane, Maya said, finding her voice. Alex, you've obviously been planning this for months. This is revenge because you couldn't handle being held accountable for your behavior. Jordan turned to face Maya directly. Ms. Ross, let's talk about your behavior. Specifically your relationship with Sophie Chang and the vendor contracts you've been steering toward companies you have financial interests in. The next slide showed email chains between Maya and Sophie discussing a consulting contract worth $1.8 million. The emails were damning, discussing kickback percentages and how to structure the contract to avoid oversight. Maya, is that your email address? Linda Flores asked. Maya's eyes darted around the room like she was looking for an escape route. I can explain that. Sophie asked me to review some vendor proposals. I was just doing due diligence. Due diligence that happened to benefit a consulting firm where your boyfriend is a partner? Jordan's voice was clinical factual. A firm that was awarded the contract despite submitting a bid that was 40% higher than our internal cost estimates. Patricia Vance, our finance expert, was shaking her head in disgust. Maya, we trusted you with budget oversight responsibility. If these allegations are true, you violated every ethical standard this company stands for. Derek tried to regain control of the narrative one more time. Look, even if there are some accounting irregularities, this whole situation is clearly motivated by Alex's personal vendetta. She's been unstable for months, paranoid, unable to work collaboratively with her colleagues. I'd been waiting for this moment for Derek to play the card that had worked so well during my termination meeting. Unstable. I stood up, pulling out my phone. Jordan, could you play the recording from Derek's conversation with his recruiter contact? Jordan clicked to an audio file. Derek's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. The beauty of this situation is that we can clean house while making it look like natural attrition. Alex has been getting increasingly difficult anyway, questioning too many decisions, asking too many questions about budget allocations. She's smart enough to eventually figure out what we're doing, so removing her eliminates a real threat to the timeline. The board members stared at Derek in horror as his own words condemned him. We've been systematically marginalizing her for months. Derek's recorded voice continued. Maya's done excellent work making Alex feel isolated and paranoid. By the time we're ready to terminate her, it'll look like she brought it on herself through her own behavioral problems. Maya gasped audibly. Even she seemed shocked by how calculating Derek's description made their campaign sound. Where did you get that recording? Derek demanded. From your recruiter contact, Jordan replied smoothly, who became very cooperative when we explained that he could face charges for conspiracy to commit fraud if he didn't provide evidence of your communications. Linda Flores looked physically sick. Derek, Maya, what you've done here is unconscionable. You've not only committed financial fraud, but you've destroyed a valued employee's reputation and career through deliberate psychological manipulation. It wasn't like that, Maya said desperately. Derek told me Alex was having performance issues, that she was becoming difficult to work with. I thought I was helping by providing feedback about her behavior. Feedback that included gaslighting her about her own perceptions and isolating her from colleagues and decision-making processes, I asked quietly. Maya couldn't meet my eyes. I never meant for it to go that far. But it did go that far, Robert Chen said. You participated in a coordinated effort to drive a 12-year employee out of the company through psychological manipulation, all while helping her supervisor commit financial fraud. Derek made one last desperate attempt to save himself. This is all revenge. Alex is unstable, vindictive. You're going to destroy this company by putting someone with clear psychological issues in charge. That's when Linda Flores stood up, her voice cutting through Derek's protest like a blade. I've heard enough. As chairwoman of this board, I'm calling for an immediate vote. All in favor of terminating Derek Saunders and Maya Ross for gross misconduct, financial fraud, and violation of their fiduciary duties to this company. The vote was unanimous. 5 hands raised without hesitation. Motion carries. Mr. Saunders. Ms. Ross, you are terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Derek's face went from pale to red with fury. You'll regret this, all of you. Alex has no idea how to run a company. She's an analyst, not a leader. You're making a catastrophic mistake. Derek, I said, my voice calm and steady. I've been watching you run this company for 12 years. I've seen every mistake you've made, every shortcut you've taken, every ethical line you've crossed. The only catastrophic mistake here was thinking you could steal from your own shareholders and get away with it. Maya was crying now, real tears that might have moved me 6 months ago. Alex, please. I know I made mistakes, but I never meant to hurt you. Can't we work this out? I looked at the woman who had been my best friend, who had listened to my dreams and fears, who had helped me pick out my apartment and celebrated my successes. The woman who had then systematically destroyed my reputation and gaslighted me into questioning my own sanity. Maya, the person I thought you were, would never have participated in what you did to me. I don't know who you actually are, but she's not someone I can trust with this company's future. Security arrived within minutes. Derek left angrily, making threats about lawsuits and investigations. that we all knew were empty bluster. Maya left quietly, still crying, carrying the same type of cardboard box I'd carried out of the building 3 weeks earlier. After they were gone, Linda Flores turned to address the remaining board members. We need an interim CEO while we conduct a proper search for permanent leadership. Given the circumstances and Alex's ownership stake, I recommend that she assume that role immediately. I second that motion, Robert Chen said. All in favor, another unanimous vote. Alex, Linda said, congratulations, you're now the interim CEO of Reynolds Tech. I looked around the boardroom at these accomplished people who had just entrusted me with leadership of a company that had been my life for 12 years. It felt surreal, like a dream I'd been having without realizing it. Thank you for your confidence, I said. I know this has been an extraordinary day, but I want you to know that I take this responsibility seriously. My first priority is stabilizing the company and restoring the ethical culture that my grandfather built here. The aftermath of that board meeting played out over the following weeks, like dominoes falling in carefully planned sequence. Derek made good on his threat to file a wrongful termination lawsuit, but it was settled quickly when our lawyers presented evidence of his fraud scheme. He took a position with a startup in Austin, though notably not the one he'd been planning to sell our R&D division to. Maya tried to fight her termination, claiming she'd been manipulated by Derek and hadn't understood the full scope of what was happening. Her lawsuit lasted longer, but eventually she settled when Jordan threatened to pursue criminal fraud charges. She moved back to her hometown in Ohio and took a job with a small marketing firm. Sophie Chang, the CEO's wife, who had been Maya's contact for the vendor kickbacks, filed a defamation lawsuit claiming we'd damaged her reputation. That case was settled quietly with a non-disclosure agreement, though I heard through industry contacts that her husband's company had requested her resignation from any role in their business operations. But the situation with Lily was the most complicated to resolve. When I called my sister the day after the board meeting, she was crying before I even finished explaining what had happened. Alex, I swear I didn't know about the fraud. Derek told me you were having performance issues, that you were resistant to change and difficult to work with. I thought I was helping by taking on more responsibility. I believed her mostly. Lily was ambitious and had been willing to accept recognition she hadn't earned, but she wasn't a criminal. She'd been manipulated by Derek and Maya, used as a weapon against me without fully understanding what she was participating in. Lily, I know Derek and Maya fed you information designed to turn you against me. But you still chose to present my work as your own. You still chose to believe their version of events instead of talking to me directly. I know I screwed up. I was just so desperate to prove myself, to finally be the successful one for once. The pain in her voice was real, and it reminded me of something Dr. Green had said about how family dynamics can make people vulnerable to manipulation. I made a decision that felt both generous and strategic. Lily, I'm not going to fire you, but you're going on probationary status. You'll report directly to me, and you'll be working with a mentor to develop genuine skills instead of relying on other people's work. It wasn't punishment so much as reality therapy. Lily was talented, but she'd been coasting on charm and borrowed insights for months. If she was going to build a real career, she needed to develop actual competencies. 2 weeks after becoming interim CEO, I called an all-hands meeting to address the elephant in the room. The entire company was buzzing with rumors about the sudden departure of 2 senior leaders, and my unexpected promotion from terminated employee to chief executive. The auditorium was packed with people standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. I looked out at faces I'd known for years, colleagues who'd watched me be escorted out in disgrace, and were now trying to understand how I'd returned as their boss. I know the last few weeks have been confusing and unsettling, I began. You deserve to know the truth about what happened here and what we're going to do to make sure it never happens again. Sahaba. I walked them through the basics of the fraud scheme, the systematic manipulation that had been used against me, and the steps we were taking to restore ethical leadership to the company. Going forward, this company will operate according to three core principles, I said. First, merit over politics. Your success here will be determined by the quality of your work and your contribution to our mission, not by your ability to play office games or manipulate relationships. Scattered applause began building across the auditorium. Second, transparency. You have the right to understand how decisions are made that affect your work and your career. We'll be implementing regular communication protocols and feedback systems that give you visibility into company operations. The applause was stronger now. Third, psychological safety. No one should have to fear retaliation for asking questions, raising concerns, or challenging ideas. The best companies are built on honest communication and diverse perspectives, not on silencing dissent. The standing ovation that followed felt like vindication for everything I'd endured. These were my people, the colleagues I'd worked alongside for years, and they were telling me they supported the kind of leadership I wanted to provide. But the real test of our turnaround came in the numbers. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office on the 20th floor reviewing our quarterly reports with a sense of satisfaction I'd never experienced as an employee. Employee satisfaction scores had increased by 40%. People were staying late by choice instead of obligation, collaborating across departments, bringing innovative ideas to leadership meetings. The toxic culture that Derek and Maya had fostered was being replaced by something healthier and more productive. More importantly, our profits were up 18%. It turned out that when you stopped stealing from your own company and started investing in your people's potential, good things happened to your bottom line. We'd also successfully renegotiated the Meridian contract with me personally presenting the strategy I'd originally developed. They were so impressed with our comprehensive approach that they'd expanded the scope and increased the value to $6 million. That Saturday, I drove out to the cemetery where Grandpa Ethan was buried. I'd been meaning to visit for months, but the chaos of the transition had consumed all my time and energy. His headstone was simple, just his name and dates with the inscription, "He built with integrity." I'd brought his old chess set, the one we'd played on every Saturday, for years. I set up the board on the grass next to his grave and played one final game against the memory of his strategic wisdom. Every move reminded me of lessons he'd taught me, advice he'd given me, moments when he'd helped me see possibilities I'd missed. "You were right," I said to the headstone when the game was finished. "They really didn't see me coming." I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 12 years of careful planning, patient relationship building, and strategic positioning. Months of betrayal manipulation and systematic undermining that had nearly broken me. Weeks of legal maneuvering and corporate warfare that had restored my rightful place. But more than any of that, I thought about the personal transformation that had occurred. I'd started this story as someone who desperately needed other people's approval and recognition. I'd been willing to minimize myself, to accept crumbs of acknowledgement, to let others take credit for my work as long as they included me in their success. The woman sitting by that gravestone was different. She knew her worth not because other people recognized it, but because she recognized it herself. She didn't need Derek's mentorship or Maya's friendship or Lily's approval to validate her capabilities. I packed up the chess set and walked back to my car, thinking about everything that had changed and everything that had stayed the same. They took my job. I reclaimed the company, but the real win, I finally owned my worth. And that was something no one could ever take away from me again. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal strategy and ultimate justice, hit that subscribe button for more real-life revenge stories that prove patience really is power. What would you have done in Alex's situation? Let me know in the comments below.